There was a time when Christians helped invent the hospital. We're going to explore how compassion became an institution. Imagine becoming seriously ill in a Roman city, let's say 1700 years ago. There's no ambulance coming. There's no emergency department around the corner. Skilled physicians certainly exist, and the ancient world had already developed important medical traditions, healing sanctuaries, and even specialized facilities for Roman soldiers. But suppose you're poor and alone, or unable to pay for care. Who comes for you? Then imagine hearing a knock at the door, and someone has come. Not because you're wealthy or important, and not because you can repay the favor. They have come because they are Christian, and they believe that caring for someone who suffers is part of what it means to follow Jesus. That conviction would eventually help transform the history of human health care. Join the conversation, please. Before we continue, consider subscribing to the Atara Group International channel as we explore more overlooked stories from Christian history and consider what they can teach the church today. We also want to hear from you. What does it mean to you when someone describes the church as a hospital for sinners? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if there's a person, event, controversy, or forgotten chapter of Christian history you'd like us to explore, tell us. Your suggestion may become one of our future articles. Anyway, Christians didn't invent medicine. We should begin with an important historical clarification. Christians did not invent medicine or the first organized form of medical care. Greek and Roman physicians had practiced medicine long before Christianity came about. Hippocratic medicine had centuries of history, connected with healing sanctuaries, and operated in various locations throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. And Roman military facilities provided organized treatment for soldiers. Other civilizations also possessed sophisticated traditions of medicine and international care. Christianity's distinctive contribution was different, however. Christians increasingly connected care for the sick with charity toward people who might have no ability to repay the services. So over time, this helped produce institutions specifically dedicated to caring for the sick and the poor and people who were vulnerable. Compassion was becoming organized. So what happens if compassion becomes dangerous even? The Christian commitment to caring for the sick became especially visible during epidemics. So imagine disease sweeping through your city. You don't understand bacteria, you don't know what a virus is, there are no antibiotics, no intravenous fluids. You only know that your neighbor became sick yesterday, and now other members of his household are becoming sick as well. And the safest response might seem obvious, just get away or stay away. Now, during the devastating 3rd century epidemic, often called the Plague of Cyprian, Cyprian of Carthage, which was in North Africa, challenged Christians to respond differently. Christian mercy, he argued, could not be reserved only for friends and fellow believers. Christians were called to demonstrate goodness even toward those outside of their faith community. Now, modern scholars debate precisely how widespread Christian nursing was and how much it contributed to Christianity's expansion. Rodney Stark is one who famously argued that Christian caregiving during epidemics might have increased survival and strengthened Christian communities. His demographic conclusions remain debated, but the Christian theological commitment to caring for the sick, in principle at least, is well documented. Now, the principle was remarkable. Compassion doesn't stop when compassion becomes costly. Jesus had already showed them how. Why would Christians risk caring for people who could offer them nothing in return? Well, because that was the story they'd been taught. Jesus repeatedly moved toward people others would have avoided: the sick, the poor, the disabled, the socially excluded, the ritually unclean. And then he told the story of a wounded man lying beside a road. Priest passed him, Levite passed him, and then a Samaritan actually stopped. And the Samaritan treated the man's wounds and transported him somewhere safe and paid for his continuing care and promised to return to check on things afterwards. This is in Luke chapter 10, starting about verse 25. This Samaritan man did not merely feel compassion, but he organized it. He acted on it, carried it through. And it was perhaps that distinction that helps explain what happened next in Christian history. We come to the time of a man named Basil, who is going to build something extraordinary. Here it is. So by the 4th century, Christian charity was moving beyond individual acts of kindness towards organized institutions that would do that together. And around the year 369, Basil of Caesarea helped establish an extraordinary charitable complex just outside Caesarea up in Cappadocia. Later associated with Basil's name as the Basiliad, it provided assistance to people experiencing poverty and illness, including individuals suffering from diseases that carried severe social stigma. So you see, Basil believed Christian wealth brought responsibilities towards people in need, and his ministry reflected a broader transformation occurring within late antiquity and Christianity at that time as a place to care for the poor, which was becoming increasingly institutionalized under his influence. Now, the Basiliad matters because Christians were no longer simply saying we should care about sick people. They were actually creating places designed to do it continuously. Now, historians rightly caution against calling Basil's institution the world's first hospital without any qualification, yet Christian charitable institutions became enormously important in the development of hospitals and providing organized care for the sick and making it available as well to those who were poor. Compassion had become practice, practice had become ministry, and ministry was sometimes strengthened through an institution. Now, as it turns out, as time would open up, the monks of the ancient world would carry the tradition forward. Christian monasteries continued developing this tradition. Monastic communities established infirmaries, cared for sick members, welcomed travelers, and developed increasingly organized approaches to healthcare. So take, for example, the rule of Saint Benedict. It placed extraordinary importance upon caring for sick members of one's community. The sick were to receive special attention because serving them was understood as ultimately serving Christ himself. Now, medieval hospitals would eventually take various forms, and again, historians caution against simply equating them with modern medical centers, but they could function as places of, hospitality, shelter, charity, and ultimately nursing in a context of religious care and, of course, the providing of medical treatment. Still, something profound had happened. Caring for suffering people had become part of the institutional identity of Christianity. The church is being seen, if you will, as a hospital. And that history gives us new meaning to an expression Christians sometimes use today: the church is a hospital for sinners, albeit our emphasis today is, of course, on the care of souls. The exact modern phrase should not be confidently attributed to any one Christian writer, but the underlying image is a very old one. Early Christian teachers, including a man named John Chrysostom, frequently used the languages of sickness and medicine and physicians and healing when he was discussing the addressing of human sin, need for repentance, and also for providing pastoral care. Christ was understood as a physician of a wounded humanity, and the church was a place where wounded people could come and seek healing. But perhaps we should take that metaphor a little bit more seriously. If the church is a hospital, what happens when wounded people walk through the doors? Someone enters carrying grief. Another carries addiction. Someone is recovering from some kind of trauma. Someone's marriage is collapsing. Someone is lonely. Someone's ashamed of their past. Someone has questions about God that they're afraid to ask. When they come here, will they encounter compassion or judgment? We would never stand outside an emergency room and tell a bleeding person, come back when you've cleaned yourself up. So why would the church communicate that message to spiritually or emotionally wounded people? You see, compassion doesn't ignore the wound. Now, of course, the hospital metaphor has another side. A good physician does not examine an infected wound and declare that nothing is wrong. Healing requires truth and Christian compassion, and therefore does not mean pretending that every behavior is healthy or that every choice is harmless. It means being able to say, you're hurting, you matter, and we will walk with you toward healing. That is compassion shaped by both grace and truth. So you can ask yourself and your fellowship, what kind of a hospital are we? Most congregations will never operate medical hospitals, of course, but every church can become a community where suffering is noticed, and churches can visit the hospitalized. They can provide meals after illness, let's say. They can support caregivers. They can accompany grieving families, educate congregations about mental health, support people in recovery, and assist elderly neighbors, and feed struggling families, and connect people with professional resources, and sometimes just simply sit beside someone whose world has fallen apart. The early Christians did not influence healthcare merely because they talked about compassion. They practiced it. They organized it. Eventually, they built institutions around it. And perhaps that leaves today's church with a challenging question. If we call the church a hospital for sinners, would the wounded people in our communities recognize it as that? We'd like to continue the tradition of compassion. At Atara Group International, we believe Christian leadership is ultimately demonstrated through service, through theological education, leadership development, counseling education, and practical ministry training. We seek to equip Christian leaders to recognize suffering and respond with wisdom and competence and Christ-centered compassion. True, the methods have changed dramatically since Basil opened the doors of his 4th century ministry. That calling itself has not changed. See the person, recognize their dignity, move toward their suffering, and respond with compassion.